Welcome to Radical Personal Finance, a show dedicated to providing you with the knowledge, skills, insight, and encouragement you need to live a rich and meaningful life now while building a plan for financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Joshua Sheets. Today on the podcast, I would like to share with you a short audio excerpt from some of the classes that I have been giving at the RPF Academy. So at RPF Academy this year, I have been walking through a comprehensive personal finance curriculum. We began in November, and throughout this entire year, I have been teaching a weekly class, and the class basically covers every aspect of financial planning, both personal finance things as well as technical financial planning. And so the class has been great, had a great response. It has been keeping me very, very busy, and I am thrilled for that. And it's been just a great experience. Over the last weeks, we have been steadily going through part of the module on increasing income. Should be no surprise to you that I believe that the single most impactful thing that you can do to improve your financial results is to increase your income. It is the one thing that you can do that allows you to both spend more money and to invest more money so that you become wealthier. And it's the most impactful thing that allows you to save a lot of money so you become richer faster. Once you acquire a lot of money and you have large amounts of assets that you are managing, then the most important thing that drives all of your financial results is the rate of return that you earn on your investments. But prior to that, the key factor that determines your financial results is how much you earn. And so I'm not sure that increasing income should be 80% of what we talk about in financial planning. Maybe that's a little too high, but if it is a little too high, it's probably not that much too high. Increasing income is the most important factor. But of course, that's not usually associated with technical financial planning for obvious reasons, that financial planners don't really know how to advise on that. And so over the last few weeks, I've gone through a number of different models, very simple, practical, actionable models to help you come up with ways to improve your income, starting where you are and then thinking in the long term. Well, I thought it'd just be fun to share with you the audio of a recent class. This is less than an hour. And in this audio, I go over some of the factors that are involved in different high-paying jobs and point them out to you. And so I thought you might enjoy listening to that for today's podcast. If you are interested in joining RPF Academy, you can do that. Go to rpfacademy.com, sign up there, rpfacademy.com. It's available to you. The class, access to the class comes with all of the recorded classes that we have already done over the last few months. So there's plenty to keep you busy and plenty to get you started, as well as you would have access to the live classes all through 2025, where you can interact with me and I answer all of your questions on the weekly live classes. All students in the Academy also get 2 personal financial consultations with me, one at the beginning of the course, one at the end of the course. And so far, I have nothing but good feedback on it. I still have lots of things that I'm improving, lots of things that need to get better. So I have plenty of things that I'm critical of. But so far, I think the consensus that I have heard back from my students has been that it's a financial no-brainer, that it's absolutely just a no-brainer, and that it has been very, very useful. So I would love to have you as a student, rpfacademy.com, sign up today. And for now, enjoy this free class. In this module, we continue our discussion of high-paying jobs, but in this module, I want to go a little bit more theoretical. Now, we've begun very practically with how to increase your income in the job that you already have, and then we started to move on to different ways for you to increase your income with different jobs. And I've given you a variety of ways to look at that on a very practical level, to use some of the AI tools to look for higher paying jobs that are close to you, that are available to you. We've talked about some lists of jobs that might inspire you. But now I want to go a little bit theoretical and talk about the common features of high paying jobs. What do high paying jobs have in common? The key idea is we really can't fake any of this stuff that we're doing for very long. We have to actually do the hard work. And in order to do that consistently, we need to understand the key factors that all high-paying jobs have in common, and then maximize those factors. Now, here is the simple version that my father taught me when I was a teenager. He said, Joshua, do something that's hard, do it well, and keep your boss happy. Anytime I went to a job, he would say, Joshua, find out who your boss is, keep him happy. If you want to make a lot of money, do something really hard. To this day, I still believe that to be the case. If you go out to a list of teenagers, right, unskilled workers, and you have one job that is easy and fun, and you have another job that is hard and difficult, you can get most of the teenagers to work for you much more cheaply doing the job that is easy and fun as compared to the job that is difficult. When I was younger, I put a lot of roofs on a lot of houses. Roofing is hard work. Most of roofing, however, is not particularly skilled work. You can be a helper schlepping shingles up and down a ladder. That's not particularly skilled. You can learn to do most of the tasks of roofing, of tearing off a roof, pretty easily, but it is hard. It is hot. It is hard. Everything is heavy. Now compare that as a potential teenage job to being a lifeguard. Lifeguarding perhaps isn't the best example because actually you need some sort of professional qualification for that. So let's compare that to dipping ice cream out at an ice cream cart on the beach. And go to a teenager and offer him those two jobs. Well, I don't know what current wages are for ice cream scoopers and dippers, but I would imagine that if you come to a young teenage boy and you say to him, hey, listen, all you got to do is stand out here on the beach and man this ice cream cart. And when people come along and buy ice cream, scoop it out. And the rest of the time, you can stand here and enjoy the day. You can wear a pair of board shorts and just enjoy being on the beach, watch all the pretty girls go past. I'll pay you $10 an hour for that. A lot of teens would go for that kind of job. Why? Well, it's easy. Now, if you take that same teen and you say, I've got a job here where you can work for me as a roofer. And what you're going to be doing is carrying heavy things. You're going to be working hard. You're going to be out in the sun. You're going to be up there with a bunch of dudes ripping roofs off, and it's going to be long, hard work, and I'll pay you $10 an hour. Which job would you prefer? Well, everyone's going to go for the easy, fun job, and no one's going to go for the hard job, which means that in order to get workers for the hard job, the employer has to offer more money. How much more? I don't know. If I put myself in that world as a teen, I'd probably do the ice cream dipping job for $10 an hour, and I'd probably want $15 an hour or more for the hard job. You have to get a bit of a differentiation. Well, this is the principle that applies to basically all jobs. So the simple version of this is that if you want to get paid a lot of money, do something hard. Do something that's really hard that most people don't want to do. Do it well and keep your boss happy. Now, let's dig into the details, though, because we can encapsulate this basic idea with what I've just said, find something hard and do it well, or we can go a few layers down and we can dig into this in a detailed version. So I want you to maximize a number of these different factors. You're not going to be able to maximize all of them, but you should maximize some of them, and you should be very intentional about them. The first factors involve your personal skill and expertise. Jobs that require higher levels of skill, higher levels of expertise, will always pay more than jobs that require less skill and less expertise. This would include things like the technical skill level of a job. A job that requires very specialized knowledge and very specialized skills are always going to pay more than those that require simply general skills. This is why, if we look at that list of medical specialties, the highest paying medical specialties usually involve some form of surgery. A surgeon is a doctor, just like a general family medical practitioner is a doctor. They're both doctors. And being a doctor requires a higher level of skill than many other occupations, which is why in a free market system, we tend to reward doctors with a much higher level of compensation than many other jobs. But the highest paid doctors, the surgeons, are the ones who have the highest levels of technical skills. The same thing is true in almost any field. You could be a software engineer. You could be an architect. You could be any kind of designer. You could be a specialist in some marketing function. The higher the level of technical skill that's required for your job, the more money you can command from the marketplace. So look for things that require you to develop a high level of technical skill, and then develop that technical skill. Recognize, again, we can't fake it. We have to actually do it. That means you have to go and you have to study, you have to practice, and you have to practice, and you have to practice, and you have to study and practice and study and practice, and you have to do, and you have to do, and you have to do, and you have to do. And after you have done that for many, many years, you will acquire a very high level of technical skill, and you will command a very high hourly wage from the marketplace. The next component of skill and expertise involves the cognitive demand of a job. Anytime you have to engage in higher order, more complex thinking, those types of activities generally lead to higher wages. So think of this in the idea of doing strategic planning or solving big problems. Many times in business, a business will come to a bottleneck and they can't figure out what to do and how to do it. Well, somebody who can come along and who can think in a very careful and disciplined way about that situation and solve a significant problem that advances the whole business to a whole nother plateau, that person can command a very high wage. And cognitively demanding jobs tend to pay more. Thinking is actually hard. I do a lot of this in my work as a consultant. When I'm working with clients, I find that after a day of working with clients, I am more physically tired than I am doing manual labor. It's exhausting to have to be on, to have to think, to have your brain on, to be performing, to be really engaging, to really be doing active listening. It's exhausting to be involved in strategic planning and to be thinking about all the different permutations of a particular scenario. It's exhausting to have to articulate your words very, very carefully. And yet, that results in my being able to command a higher wage because of that high-level cognitive demand. So look for jobs or careers that are going to require of you a very high level of intellectual performance. The third component is that of physical skill and risk. Some high-paying jobs involve unique physical capacities. So think here of a professional athlete or a fighter pilot. These things involve not only high levels of technical skill and extensive training, but also the basic physical risk that somebody is going under. So if you're a welder, but you apply your welding skills as an undersea oil rig welder in the North Atlantic, you're going to earn much, much more than the guy who just simply welds stuff in comfort and ease in the local welding shop because of the risk that is involved. So look for opportunities and jobs that require a high level of risk if you want to make high levels of income. Creativity and innovation. People who generate original ideas or solve complex problems, think here inventors and entrepreneurs, can earn significantly more. When I was younger, I thought that creativity meant being good at drawing. I was so wrong. I thought, well, I'm not good at drawing, so I must not be very creative. I have since come to learn and believe that I am highly creative. Creativity is one of my core skills that I have in abundance and that I work hard to develop. It doesn't express itself in my ability to physically draw pictures, but it expresses itself in my creative solutions to big problems. And what I have found is that the more I lean into my ability to be creative and to innovate, the more the market rewards me with higher levels of income. So those are some different dimensions of skill and expertise. It's unlikely that you're going to implement all of these, but you can implement one or some of these in order to get better results. So if you take what you're doing right now and you say, how could I do this work in a way that is physically riskier? That might be a pathway to higher income for some people. Or how could I do this kind of work, but at a much higher skill level? That's a different way of analysis. So use these ideas as a way to think about how to enhance what you're doing or to help inform you of the direction you would like to go. Next, we move on to training, education, and credentials. So here, more specifically, we're talking about educational requirements. In general, more years of schooling increases your earning potential. We know this crystal clear, that the more years of schooling that you have, master's degree, a PhD, a JD, an MD, anything like that, we know that this has a relatively obviously measurable effect on your total income. And you can see this within specialties. Again, you can see an almost direct correlation in the wages of medical specialists as compared to generalists. And yet the specialists have more years of educational requirements and more years of skill building. Think about certifications and licenses. Some professions require specific credentials, and these credentials act as gatekeepers, which allow the people with those credentials to earn a lot of money. So in the financial world, you would have somebody who's a certified public accountant or a chartered financial analyst or a certified financial planner. Years ago, when I was working in professional financial planning, there was a chart on the wall, and it showed how much the average worker at that company earned without any professional designations, and it showed how much that person earned with a chartered life underwriter designation, a CLU, how much a person earned with a CHFC, chartered financial consultant, and how much a person earned with a CFP, a certified financial planner. And I looked at that, and if I recall correctly, the average income for the person with no designations was, $150,000 a year. And then the average income with the person with 3 designations was, $450,000 a year, something like that. And I said, well, it's pretty obvious that if I get those designations, I'm more likely to get to the $450,000 a year income versus the $150,000 a year income. And you can argue and cry and moan about, well, is it because you're older and have more experience in the business? Of course it is. Or is it because of the credentials themselves? Of course it is. You can't disentangle these things. And what happened is I went through the process of becoming highly credentialed as a professional financial planner. I discovered that there was this massive payoff between the two, that the more classes I took, the better I became. And yet I didn't need the credential. I was getting better and getting better results because I was better, but I didn't need the credential. And in the beginning, I was really obsessed with showing off the credentials, making sure they're all on my business cards, making sure that everyone knows all these credentials I have. Today, all of those plaques and diplomas are in a bag in the attic. They're not even on my wall. I don't even have them displayed at the moment. I will in the future. It's fun to put that stuff out on the wall. But what I'm saying is that education becomes part of who you are. And so certifications enhance your ability to do your work better while also getting you past the gatekeepers in a particular area. So think of things like a pilot's license. So you can go, and one of the high-paying professions that was on that list of professions that we talked about is that of being an airline pilot. Anybody with the appropriate intelligence and work ethic and conscientiousness can become an airline pilot. But because of this relatively long and expensive pathway into it, not so many people do become an airline pilot. To get your airline transport certificate, you have to not only have all of the test and experience requirements, but you also have to have 1,500 hours of experience flying airplanes. And so those requirements work as a gatekeeper, basically sort of an unorganized union, an unorganized cartel that keep a lot of people out, but yet those who can run the gauntlet of the necessary certifications and licenses are able to get in and get access to the higher level of earnings. So look for professions or jobs that require lots of certifications and licenses. And then pay attention to occupations that have a high difficulty of entry. The harder it is to actually qualify for a job, for example, law school or medical school, the fewer competitors and the higher the wages. I remember this years ago When I was 20 something years old, I had lost my passport while traveling, and I was in the U.S. Embassy, and I was replacing my passport. And at the time, that was the first interaction I'd ever had with a diplomat for the U.S. government, with a foreign service officer. And as I was having that experience, I was in college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I thought to myself, you know what? It'd be pretty cool to be a foreign service officer for the U.S. government. Wouldn't that be a fun job? I like to travel. That sounds really fun. So I pulled up the website and I looked at all the requirements. And as I'm looking at them, I realized, okay, well, this sounds cool, but it sounds kind of hard, right? There's a test involved with it. Then there's an interview process. That sounds kind of hard. And I closed the page and went on about my life and kind of never did anything more with it. A couple of years ago, a year ago, this last year, I was working on planning on something. And I went back to the Foreign Service Officer webpage and I started looking through it. And I was astonished at what an astoundingly cool career that would have been for someone like me. Even today, it's super attractive to me. The idea of going and being a diplomat just is super attractive to me. And it seems like a perfect fit for many of my personality cues, of the things that I'm interested in, the things that involve me. And I look back and I did the calculations. I went through all of their benefit programs and I calculated what I would have earned if 20 years ago I had become a financial services officer. And it would have been astonishingly high paying for me in my particular circumstances. Far more in some calculations than many other jobs that I have done. And I thought, wow, why didn't I do that? Well, it was just a simple test. But the 20-year-old me wasn't smart enough to say, hey, this is hard to get into. So that means that on the other side of this test, there's probably some pretty cool stuff because it's hard to get into. So what I would encourage you is take this seriously and look for things that are hard to get into. Don't look for things that are easy. Look for things that are hard. Look for tests. Look for credential requirements. Look for things where nobody gets hired. Because what can happen is when you find those, on the other side of the hiring gauntlet, you're more likely to find a high-paying career. So don't train yourself to see tests and requirements and then run away. On the contrary, train yourself to see that stuff and say, ooh, I probably found something hard. I should pay more attention and look for it. Next, we have the factors of experience and career progression. So the obvious one here is how many years of experience do you have in a particular job? Many jobs pay more based solely on tenure and or accumulated expertise. So you see this in many government-type jobs where the longer you're here, yes, there are opportunities for promotion, but the longer you're here, the higher the tenure that you have and the more you are paid. Some occupations simply don't work well with incentive-based pay, so they rely on experience-based pay, and that's fine. Look for those, but just know that that's usually the slow path. However, the flip side of this being the slow path is if you can get into that job or into that occupation and you can develop the experience, and if the pathway to the higher levels is something that is attractive to you, once you reach the higher levels, that's where you really can cash out. That's where you can make your bank. That's where you can pile up the money because you're at that high level and very few other people are there with you. So look for things where as you increase your levels of experience, you can increase your levels of pay. As we've talked about elsewhere, pay attention, however, to the fact that sometimes the real payoff from these kinds of jobs doesn't come with your current earnings. Rather, it comes with your total compensation package, including things like your retirement earnings. So a good example of this would be working for the government. You may work in the military or in some other government job. And when you start a job like that, your wages are often quite modest. But as you go on and you develop more years of experience, yes, you have promotions, and those promotions will be reflected from the expertise that you've accumulated over time. And then as your pay is increasing, it's also just increasing due to time. But then the tenure that you have with the actual occupation. But then where that's really important is when you get into your calculations for a retirement plan. your pension payout. And because your pension payout is usually calculated based upon your highest earnings, which are usually at the end of your career, that's where the people who stick with something for the long term really make it enormously profitably. If you've done 20 years in the military and you've had the requisite expected advancements, then the value of your retirement pay is millions and millions of dollars. It is an enormous asset, but you only get there when you actually fulfill the qualifications necessary to have those years of experience. So pay attention to that and try to choose something where you can develop that experience over time. Then we can get to another aspect of experience, right? Industry-specific experience. So if you have a particular experience in a very specialized industry, then that experience will pay off in higher wages. You see this right now in AI. Everyone is rushing to AI. Those who have a deep level of experience in AI are able to come in and command quite lucrative employment contracts because they can apply their deep experience to a specific problem. You see this in a variety of different industries. And so it really pays to pick an industry that you can continue within for a very long time and develop a lot of experience within that industry. And if you have the experience within that industry, you should be very slow to just jump willy-nilly to some other random industry, but rather stay focused on the industry that you're in because of that industry-specific experience. Similarly, management and leadership experience. That as you move into management and you demonstrate yourself to have leadership qualities, it's much easier to command a higher level of income than it is without that. So this is where we start to bring things together. Talk about engineering, for example. There are a number of engineers here in this course. Engineering is really interesting because it requires a very high level of technical skill, as well as some of these other aspects that we've discussed, right? Engineering is very cognitively demanding. It has high levels of educational requirements. The difficult tests that are necessary often serve as a gatekeeping mechanism to keep people out of the engineering field. The high levels of mathematical performance needed keep people out. The high workload of doing a proper engineering degree screens out a lot of applicants. So an engineer can come in, and a starting engineer will come things that you can study and specializations that you can acquire. Now, what are the pathways for an engineer to enhance his ability? Well, first of all, we had all that good kind of general gatekeeping stuff that we ran the gauntlet on with engineering and had 4 years of hard engineering skill. Of course, you can go down the professional engineer pathway. That certificate pays a lot in the engineering space. But then we focus on industry-specific experience. So an engineer who has a high level of industry-specific experience now becomes a very specialized commodity. And so I've worked with a lot of engineers, have a high level of industry-specific experience, but they're kind of topped out at the engineering space. So what's the next step up? Well, the next step up is always going to involve some form of management and leadership experience. It's the ability to lead people, the ability to be an engineering manager or senior engineering manager. And this is where engineers usually split. Those who decide, I'm not interested in that, I don't like people, I became an engineer so I could work with science and not with people, they stay at a certain level. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, you don't have to always increase your income. If you know, I like doing this engineering work, I make plenty of money, I'm happy, that's fine. But those who embrace building the people skills, the leadership skills, and the management experience, when you layer that on top of a deep technical background, that's where you can really make a big jump. You go from a few $100,000 a year, which is usually where engineers top out. I see a lot at 250, 350 is usually where that kind of thing maxes out. But then you can start to go up. And, in senior level, I've worked with senior level engineering managers and kind of department leads and things like that at $750,000. But they have the deep scientific background of engineering skill mixed with the leadership skill and the people skills. Then finally, think about your reputation and your personalized brand. So those who have a large personal brand can command a much higher level of income in the marketplace. And if you pay attention to the business world, this has been a very strong focus over the last few years, the development of a personal brand. The fastest business successes have come from those who have the biggest personal brands. So those who spend years cultivating a large and powerful personal brand have an asset that they can make enormous income from. Here I think of The Rock, right? Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, big movie star, was a wrestling star, movie star. I watched the launch of his tequila company, Teremana Tequila. I think that's what it's called, Teremana Tequila. And over the years, he started this thing from nothing, and it became overnight one of the biggest tequila companies out there. And he's done that with other of his brands. So you can see this happen all the time in the space of public celebrities. Think of this. I was just recently in Las Vegas, and I was amazed to see Gordon Ramsay's restaurants everywhere. I was walking around the Strip, and Gordon Ramsay has this restaurant here, and this restaurant there, and this restaurant there. Well, Gordon Ramsay has a very popular brand that he built over time. He has this huge personal brand, and then he's leveraged that personal brand into his restaurants in addition to all of his other things. And because I have a generally positive impression of Gordon Ramsay, I was quite tempted to go and eat at the Gordon Ramsay restaurant. 4 or 5 to choose from, and here he is everywhere. Sure, why not? And so I'm sure that his restaurants are much more full than his competitor, Chef Pierre. Who's Chef Pierre, you ask? Well, of course, exactly. You make my point. We don't know who Chef Pierre is, but we know who Chef Gordon Ramsay is because he's built the personal brand. And you see this with Kim Kardashian and so many people, is if you have a personal brand and you're recognized in the market space, then you can use that personal brand to launch all kinds of things. Now, the same thing happens in kind of those of us who are more modest. I'm not a giant movie star. I'm not a reality TV star. But if you're a recognized expert or a consultant or an influencer who has a large personal brand, you can command a much higher pay scale because of your ability to exercise that brand. And so one of the things to focus on is to build and enhance your personal brand and build and enhance your personal reputation. Because if you are sought after because of who you are and people know who you will have a much easier time negotiating a higher payment than anything else. The most obvious example that I could give from things that I know well is things like speaking fees. The consistent way to capitalize on your personal brand is to give public speeches and command high speaking fees. And if you have even a moderate brand, and here, I mean, you've got to be semi-famous, pretty famous. But if you're just kind of a basic celebrity, then you can command a $30,000 speech, a $50,000 speech. If you're a former president, you can command a $250,000 speech for a 1 hour speech. Why? Well, without getting into the potential ethical challenges of that kind of space, the basic idea that I'm driving at here is simply to say that when you have a personal brand and you have built a polished and useful personal brand, it's saleable. You can make a lot of money off of that personal brand. So always try to build that when that fits with what you are building. By the way, this won't be easy for everyone. I think some people lean into this as obviously I want to be famous. For some of us, it's harder. I have never wanted to be famous. Not once, ever have I wanted to be famous. I don't really still have no interest. But I recognize that building your brand and building your reputation does make a difference. And so if we want to be influential or we want to be impactful, sometimes we have to overcome our personal hangups about not wanting to be famous and focus instead on serving the people that we're called to serve. Next, think about the supply and demand in the labor market. So jobs that don't have a lot of qualified professionals available will always command higher wages. So if you see that there's a job scarcity as compared to the candidates who are available and actually qualified to do that, go in that direction. If you recognize that we're going to need more of these people in the future, go in that direction. So the two examples I've chosen here is AI researchers and nuclear engineers. So AI researchers are very much in shortage right now because the marketplace is changing so quickly, and yet it seemed to come across the general public very quickly, so that we're caught without enough people, enough qualified people. This is similar to what has happened in the past few years with people like cybersecurity consultants and experts. That cybersecurity went from being something that no one even cared about to being one of the most important factors ever. So if you were a cybersecurity expert, boom, you had amazing opportunities and still do. I put nuclear engineers here because it's kind of a prognostication. I don't know, I didn't research the engineering space, but when I look at various problems, the obvious answer to energy scarcity is more nuclear power. And I see that happening in the United States and around the world, that the obvious solution to the need for clean energy is more nuclear power. So somebody who's a nuclear engineer has a very highly specialized occupation, and yet that scarcity of highly qualified nuclear engineers might lead to higher wages in the future. What I would say, though, is be careful, because gluts always follow shortages. Anytime there's a shortage, then there will quickly follow a glut, because the market responds to that. So you don't get these shortages for very long. If today there's a shortage of AI experts, a couple years from now there will no longer be a shortage. Instead, there will be a giant glut of AI experts. And so look for a window in which there's an imbalance between the job pool, the labor pool, and qualified persons. Look for that, but recognize those windows don't stay open for very long. Think about what kinds of jobs are deemed to be essential and in demand. So there are some industries that have a high ongoing demand, but relatively limited supply. The obvious one here is healthcare. Around the world, we have a graying population, and as people get older, they tend to need larger amounts of healthcare. And so anybody who has any kind of qualification in the healthcare field is working at full employment. This can range from quite simply getting the certification to work as a phlebotomist, or it can range up to being some kind of nurse's assistant, to being a nurse, to being a physician, various types, all the way through the specialties. Why? Well, because healthcare is seen as something that is essential, and it has a very high demand, but there's a limited supply for various reasons, some of which we've already talked about here. And so you can get higher pay in these spaces. And then think about what kinds of jobs might suffer risks due to automation and outsourcing. So we see a relatively unexpected thing. We've gone through enormous outsourcing trends over the past decades, but now we've seen a lot of jobs disappear to overseas work and now to AI that we wouldn't have guessed a few decades ago were going to disappear. So any job now that can be automated or outsourced is going to have lower wages than it did in the past. So you can see this with the finance space. If we look back 50 years ago, you had lots and lots of people who made a lot of money acting as stockbrokers, as stock pickers, and as advisors. Then you had a giant trend towards automation with the index fund revolution. And so that led to a complete transformation of the finance space. And now I think you're seeing the same basic trend with regard to financial planning. There's still a need for financial planners, but as I see it, the world of financial planners is being disrupted by AI. A good AI fed intelligent questions can solve at least 80% of your financial planning questions. That's why we're here in this course. That's what I'm teaching you to do. So as I would see it, that kind of job has a significant risk due to automation. Now, I would say that's different than sales. So, for example, one of the things that people thought was that the job of selling life insurance was going to be disrupted by people's ability to go buy life insurance online. Well, certainly, I'm sure that disrupted some things, but as far as I know, there's still just as much a demand for life insurance salesmen as ever, because life insurance seems to be one of those things that is better sold than bought. That most people know they'd like to buy more life insurance, but for whatever reason, very few people ever actually proactively get up and go out and actually seek the product. And because it's a licensed product, note that it's gate kept because you have to be licensed to sell it, then you don't tend to run across too many of those people. So life insurance agents, as best I can tell, still seem to have a pretty strong career, ironically stronger than those who bill themselves as general financial planners, from my perspective. Next, think about the risk, responsibility, and stress involved in a particular occupation. These are factors that will result in higher paying income. So dangerous jobs will often pay better than safer jobs due to the fact that you might die while you're doing it. So we talked about oil rig work or deep sea diving or bomb disposal, things like that. Jobs that carry a high level of financial responsibility will often pay more than those that don't. This was something that I don't miss, right? I don't miss managing people's portfolios because knowing that I'm responsible for other people's money, and if I make a bad call on some kind of investment portfolio thing, that's a very heavy stress for me. And so I don't miss not having that financial responsibility. And I recognize those who are willing to bear that responsibility, those who are willing to manage portfolios and be fully accountable for the results, manage a hedge fund, etc., they command a higher pay. And it's because they're willing to take the risk and bear the responsibility. Things like legal liability are a big deal. So professions that have legal liability, if you're going to send people into a profession where they're going to lose their life, their reputation, or face high legal liability, you have to pay them more in order to get them to accept that risk. So look for things, if you want to make more money, look for things where you take on more responsibility. Similar with things like the stress level or the intensity of work. Remember back to what my dad said, Joshua, find a job that's hard and do it, and you'll get paid more. Jobs that have a lot of pressure or long hours or extreme demands, both physically and mentally, generally pay more. If you look at interesting debates like the gender pay gap, what you find is that if you weed out jobs based upon their difficulty, most of the gender pay gap disappears. That men tend to do jobs that are harder, that have longer hours, more intense work, higher levels of stress. Women tend to naturally migrate to jobs that are easier and less demanding. And that in and of itself accounts for a significant component of the gender pay gap. So, what do you do if you care about increasing your income? Well, you have to go in the opposite direction. You have to go after a job that is high stress. You have to go after a job that is going to put you under a significant liability or significant responsibility, or is going to entail some kind of significant risk. These factors will be compensated in the fullness of time. And recognize that the higher you go in any company, the more intense these things are. So I'm not generally attracted to stress. But over time, I've realized if I don't learn to effectively manage the stress, I can't go up. Because as you go up in responsibility, you are going to face more and more attacks, more and more stress, nonstop. And so I've changed my worldview and I've decided that no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be one who leans into responsibility. Because in order for me to fulfill my destination as a man, I have to be comfortable with that. That the higher you go in society, the more leadership you exercise, whether that's in your local community, in your local church, in your neighborhood, in your company, in government, the higher you go, the more stress you are going to be put under. It's hard for me to imagine why anybody wants to be a leader. And yet, if you feel you should lead, you've got to embrace the fact that you are going to take nonstop stress and nonstop criticism. The president of the company has the most stressful job of any person in that company because he is responsible for everything. He may not have the most physically demanding job. It may look like he's just hanging out and works 3 hours a day. And in fact, he may be just hanging out and working 3 hours a day. But the stress that he bears for his job is the key thing that he gets paid for. His ability to handle the intensity and the stress associated with that. Why do we give so much honor to the president of the country or the governor of the state? Well, because the president of the country is the whipping post for the thoughts and opinions of hundreds of millions of people. And so you have to know how to bear that constant and never-ending stress and not let it destroy you. So lean into responsibility, lean into risk, lean into stress if you want to make more money. Next, think about industry and economic factors. Some industries have a much higher inherent profitability than others do. And so you've seen this in finance and tech and pharma, that these sectors of the economy, because they are so disconnected from the constraints of physical reality, these sectors have generated enormously high profits. So if you want to make a lot of money, you go after a sector that is not constrained by physical reality. A car manufacturer is constrained by physical reality. Somebody who makes roofing shingles and sells those is constrained by physical reality. But somebody who creates a tech product or a finance product is not. And so those industries are much, much more profitable than the other industries. And so if you were looking for the higher income, you should target an industry that has high levels of profitability in it so that you yourself can be entitled to larger amounts of compensation. This is why, incidentally, software engineers are some of the highest paid engineers. You can't say that a software engineer working for a FANG company is more important than an engineer who's working for a local manufacturing company in a medium-sized town in Ohio. You can't say they're more important. But the software engineer, because the industry is so much more profitable, the software engineer is more likely to be making $300,000 a year, $700,000 a year as a senior lead of some kind, as compared to the manufacturing engineer earning $130,000 a year. It's not that there's a difference; it's that they're working in different industries, and the industries are just simply the manufacturing industry simply can't. It's not capable of paying that higher level of income that the software industry can. Next, economic cycles and stability. Some industries will thrive in any economy, for example, healthcare, while others are very cyclical. So here, think construction. Now, you can do this both ways. You can go after an industry that is stable because you prize stability, or you can notice where the cycles are of a cyclical industry. And you can get in or get out depending on where you are with the business cycle. I've shared publicly for years a client that I used to have that so impressed me. He was a drywall contractor in Florida, and I met him at a time when construction had completely collapsed. He was independently wealthy because he'd been through various recessions, and he was just basically hanging out and fishing all the time. But he was very clear that he was just hanging out and fishing all the time. He had laid off all of his staff, he had parked all of his trucks, all of his equipment, and he was just hanging out and fishing for a few years. But he knew the industry would come back, and when we did come back, and I connected with him years later, he was hard at work, making money again, because he knew he was in a cyclical business. So you can look at that and say, well, if I'm conservative in my personal financial consumption, that'll give me a nice break. Why not fish for a few years and then go back to work? On the other hand, if you really are looking for stability, you need to go after an industry that is not so subject to those cyclical fluctuations. Next, think about the government and union influence that your industry faces. Regulations, labor unions, and government policies are always going to impact wages. So here, the big one is things like collective bargaining. Generally speaking, if you're in an industry that allows for collective bargaining and you join a union, you're going to get some kind of benefit from that because of the power of the union, most of the time. So that is very attractive to a lot of people. Recognize, however, that those kinds of things only happen in very stable and predictable industries. Unions only have power when they can create it for themselves. And so you may not profit from some of the other highly fluctuating opportunities that you have with new and innovative businesses. And so here we kind of could look at tech versus manufacturing, and you could see how that has happened. The fortunes have been made in tech because they weren't strangled by the unions. The unions in manufacturing have been very effective at fighting for their workers' wages and providing safety and security, but they haven't necessarily delivered on high wages. So temperamentally, just ask yourself, where do I fit temperamentally? Where am I likely to be most effective? When you get into various businesses, you want to look at your impact on the actual revenue of the business. So if you own a business or have the opportunity to do entrepreneurial activities, then you can usually make a big difference in your income because of that, because you have control over it. If we're talking about jobs, recognize that any time that you can tie your compensation directly to your production, you can often get higher earnings. Any job that directly generates revenue, here primarily sales, you can generate commissions from that revenue and you can have very high earnings, because you can easily justify and prove it. Let's say that Tom works as a mid-level strategic manager on a mid-level product department. Tom is very effective at his job. And to a degree, Tom's boss can come along and can figure out, oh, Tom's a good worker, he's effective at his job, and we sell a good amount of this product. But what the boss can't do is figure out how much Tom himself is responsible for the profits that are generated by this mid-level product and this mid-level department and Tom's work. It's hard to tie Tom directly to profitability. On the other hand, if you've got Tim, who's over here, and Tim sells, and he sells for your company, and Tim is responsible for 30% of the sales of our company to our key vendors, we can directly see that Tim is bringing in a lot of money that is paying for Tom's job. And so Tim, as the salesman, will get a much higher level of payment than Tom will. And Tim also has enormous amounts of leverage over the company. If Tim leaves, we lose potentially 30% of the revenue to our competitor, especially if the competitor poaches Tim away. So Tim has enormous negotiation leverage for his commission rate, and he has enormous leverage over the employer on an ongoing basis because he is responsible for so much income. So again, my way of thinking about this is lean into responsibility and produce results. That's how you generate the highest levels of income. But specifically here, it's because of the sales that the salesman is generating. So if you have the ability to affect the business with sales, or you have the ability to engage in good negotiation and you have leverage, you will generate higher levels of income. Then think about things like location and cost of living. So there are big differences in wages due to geography. So a high-cost city like New York or San Francisco will have jobs that pay a higher amount than those in a low cost of living rural environment. Those companies in those cities have to pay more than the companies in the rural environment have to pay. And so if you just want to make more money in general, what basically the whole world has figured out, you want to go to the most expensive city out there. And by the way, this doesn't just include cost of real estate. That also includes cost of taxes, things like that. Is that for many years, I've always been, being a tax planner, I've emphasized the value of, hey, let's pay low taxes. But in reality, you generally have the opportunity to earn the highest amounts, even in high tax places. So if you could find a way to engage in geo arbitrage, sure, go for it. But if you want to make the most money, a good kind of basic rule of thumb is go to the highest cost, most intense city that you can find and start looking for jobs there, because that's where you're going to earn the most money and that's where you're going to have the most opportunity. Think about location more broadly, right? Global versus local. I have spent a lot of time in the expat space, and in many cases, because of the difficulty of travel, because of the disruption of it, in order to get employees to go abroad, often companies have to pay more. And then we can start to actually bring in these factors together, right? So you might get hazard pay for going to a place that is particularly undesirable. Lots of people want to go and live in Paris. Not so many people want to go and live in Khartoum. So if you want to go and live in Khartoum or Islamabad or Delhi or something like that, you can often generate a much higher level of income because of that. Now, geography can go also just simply due to the difficulty of it. So if I'm coaching, back to this mythical teenager I always refer to, right? If I'm coaching an 18-year-old and he says, I want to make a lot of money, and we find out he doesn't have any skills, he doesn't have any interest in any particular area, maybe I send him to the city because he's interested in going to the city, but I also might send him to the middle of nowhere, Alaska. Right? Go and work in an engineering camp in a remote mine, or go and work at a fish camp in Alaska, or go and work on a remote oil field in Texas or something like that. Because to get people to these places, companies have to pay more money. And this strategy is usually not the best long-term strategy to increase the hourly value of your work that you create, but it can be a strategy where you get a little bit of bump on the hourly value mixed with a lot of overtime, mixed with a lot of decreasing of expenses due to living in employer-provided housing, things like that. And, an aggressive 18-year-old or 22-year-old, hopefully single, it's hard to do with a family, but you can go after that kind of job and you can walk away after a year of work with easily $50,000 in your pocket, in some cases $70,000 or $80,000 in your pocket after one hard focused year where you work nonstop. And that completely sets you free on a financial basis for you to pursue much higher paying earnings, higher paying opportunities. Finally, think about value and exclusivity, right? Some occupations offer a high level of prestige and status that leads to higher pay. Some occupations require unique talent and expertise, and of course, gatekeeping. And then look for opportunities to actually own a share of the profits. So again, it can be difficult to pay somebody a high wage. But if you as the worker are willing to take on some of the risk for the success of the business, then you can take some of your compensation in the form of equity. And if you're given equity or stock options in a business and that business works out, that's where your big wins come from. So risk means that some cases you won't make any money. But it also means that when the company works, you get a very high payoff. And so taking risk with your income is a really key factor. And as I've emphasized throughout this course, basically what you want to do with your personal finances, if you want to maximize your opportunity to make money, is you want to keep your ability to stomach risk very high. That's why having low personal consumption, having no debt, your ability to then take on risk is very high because it's not going to wipe you out. And so when you can accept very high risk, high return proposals, then you tilt the odds in your favor of being able to make enormous growth in your income. And then we take that income and we turn it into asset ownership. So ultimately, the key thing that sets your wages free is to make certain that you're not being paid in wages, but to make certain that you're being paid with other forms of income that don't require sleep. So owning equity and stock in the business, or taking your wages and investing it into other areas, is the key thing that keeps you able to always be increasing your earnings. And then we're going to talk in detail about leverage, because anytime we can find leverage where we're not tied either to the physical world or we're not tied to the constraints of time, that's where we can make enormous long-term growth opportunities. But these are harder to find and take longer to find. So in conclusion, I want you to think about these things and then look around at your particular opportunities that are available to you and ask yourself, which one of these do I see opportunities in? Is it just doing something that's hard? I know right now I've got just an easy job that, this is fun, this is easy, and it's all fine. But there's a hard job that's available across the road. Well, then go after the hard job. Or is it skill and expertise? What could I maximize in order for me to increase my income? High-paying jobs usually involve a combination of these factors: gatekeeping, very demanding, high levels of stress, very difficult, hard to do, industries that are unstable or industries that are growing. These are the common factors for all of the different jobs that pay a lot of money. So if you make a lot of money, you can't fake it. You've got to be willing to accept these things as the price of entry.